So you guys are experts in this online learning now. You have done more online learning than anyone in the history of mankind. So congratulations to you and your generation. We're going to start in on ecology here and look at some of the relationships that we can see in our environment. So far we had day one where we studied together and we introduced. Right now, hopefully you have done some research into the relationships for your short research paper. And now today we're going to be looking at systems and classification in ecology. If you wanted to look at your text, this is coming from 13.1, 13.2, and 15.3. That's where the material from these sections come from. We're not going to have any required videos for this portion. I looked and found lots of very interesting 40-minute videos or 1-hour videos, but nothing that was a good little hook for us here. So we won't have any videos this time, and homework would be to, yes, give us your report and then to complete your student notes. So this week, all we have is this one day of notes. So those will be due on Monday. All right, so systems and classification. So if you think about biology, we have lots of levels of complexity as we are looking. So we could talk about a cell, and we look at the components that make up one cell, and then we looked at the cell and we said, well, actually that cell is part of some tissue, and then the tissues make up an organ, and the organ makes up an organ system, and then that organ system is part of an organism. And now we can take from the level of organisms, where we were looking at in the last few units, to something even bigger than the individual. So an organism is an individual living thing, like this alligator here. And then that organism is part of a population. So a population is a group of the same species that lives in the same area. And when we're looking at ecology here, the same area could be something very, very small, like one rotting log, or it could be something huge, like a continent. So as we're looking at this, talking about a population, it has to be individuals that have some interaction with each other, but they can be at vastly different scales. So here's our population. And then that organism is living in a population, but they're not living all on their own. They're interacting with other species that live together in the same area. So we'll look at all of the living species there, and we'll call that a community. So the community has all of the living things in that area. And then we could look up even further and say, well, okay, then we'll talk about the ecosystem. And you hear that word a lot as we're talking about conservation and taking care of nature. We look at ecosystem. When we say ecosystem, we're looking at the living things and the non-living things. We could say the biotic, those that are living, and the abiotic, the things that are not living, and how they interact with each other. Okay, so we have this ecosystem here. So here we're looking at a swamp, and this swamp has a community of living things. Part of that community is a population of alligators, and then we could look at this one individual and see the organism there. Okay, and then if we wanted to, if we wanted to look even a little higher there, we could talk about a biome, and a biome is a major regional area characterized by specific climate conditions and plant communities. Okay, so we'll be looking at that a bit more. So biomes are big swaths of continents, usually. So when we're looking at our biotic factors, all of the living things in an ecosystem make up the biotic factors. What types of things might that be? Well, we've already looked at our kingdoms, right? We had our bacteria, archaea, protists, fungi, plants, and animals. Then those abiotic factors. This one might be the one that's a little harder to picture. What things are going to be interacting with the living things but are not living things themselves? So if you think about that, what are some things that might need to be considered here? You're looking at this picture. What things in this picture aren't living? Okay, you probably saw, well, there's water. Water's not alive. The clouds, the atmosphere. There are lots of things that influence populations and individuals. So usually one species is going to have a set of conditions where it can thrive. So if it has the right mineral resources, if it has the right pH, the right amount of light, the right temperatures, the right amount of water, the right amount of humidity, all these things are going to be abiotic factors that will determine whether that species can live well in that area or not. Sometimes if conditions aren't ideal, they can still survive, but they might not be able to thrive there. Good. Okay. So, what things are going to shape a biome? Okay. So, you look at these three pictures here, and you can tell that these are different. Like sometimes when you say, okay, think of a forest, you might have one picture in your mind, and someone who comes from somewhere else might have a very different picture in their mind. So, what things are going to shape these? Why is it that these three places don't all have the same kinds of plants and communities there? So, they are going to be determined by their climate and then typically described by the plants that live there. So, when we say climate, what are we talking about? We're talking about the temperature and precipitation that area gets. So here is a map with Earth broken down into major terrestrial biomes. When we look at what the largest biome on Earth is, we have to say, well, it's the ocean. Look at how much ocean there is compared to the land. But here we're going to look at the terrestrial biomes first. And what do we see? We see tropical rainforests, we see grasslands, deserts, temperate forests, taiga, and tundra. And then there's also a couple of places that they say, well, there are areas that are not biomes. And we'll see why a little later on here. Okay? And we can break this down into many more specific biomes, but these are general biomes here. So do you see any patterns as you look at this? Okay, you probably do. So we'll continue looking at these as we go. So let's take a look at our tropical rainforests. Tropical rainforests, where do we see these on the map? Okay. So we see Southeast Asia nearby. Neighboring us, we see in South America, Central America, Africa, Now, when I first came to Thailand, before they said it was too dangerous to go to the 3 southern provinces of Thailand, I went down to the Malaysian border, and there was a national park there because I wanted to see a tropical rainforest. And so I got there, and as soon as I got there, I started sweating, and I never stopped sweating. And I said, boy, oh, right, tropical rainforest. And then I started walking, and I started trudging through mud, and I said, oh, tropical rainforest, right? And it ended up that it was a beautiful place, but not so comfortable. But I was glad to have experienced it. So that is tropical rainforest. Usually warm temperatures and lots of rainfall all through the year. Okay, so here the graph here shows one example of a tropical rainforest and how much precipitation we get and what the temperatures are like through the year. You look at that temperature, much like Thailand. How much fluctuation do we have in those temperatures? Not much at all. It stays warm year round. Okay. Tropical dry forest. Here we have warm temperatures and then a wet season followed by a dry season. So much of Thailand would be like this. And so the characteristic plants and trees that we have in our area reflect this tropical dry forest. If you so we have trees, nope. We have trees that can thrive through the rains and then can survive through those dry parts of the year as well. Tropical grasslands or savanna. These are characterized by warm temperatures. There is a wet season and a dry season here as well. And the areas where we find these actually overlap with the tropical dry forests. Why are there fewer trees here? So lots of these places will have rainfall that comes in large amounts, and those grasses often can take that sudden rainfall and use it for quick growth, and then they can outcompete those trees. So acacia trees might be one that you see in the savanna, but many grasses. Okay, and then if we look at our deserts will have very low precipitation. They're arid. So 25 centimeters or less of rain on average. So that is what makes a desert a desert. Okay, are deserts hot? Well, many of them are, but not all of them. So they could be hot, and we also have deserts that are very cold as well. So the thing that makes a desert is that very low rainfall. And then the temperate grasslands, the prairies, usually have dry, warm summers and cold winters. So there's a cycle of rain, a cycle of temperature fluctuation, where the Great Plains in North America, the central part of North America, in Canada and the United States, Kansas, Saskatchewan, those are going to have prairies, very few trees growing there. Also, through Europe, Ukraine and Russia, Southern Africa, and the southern part of South America as well, have these temperate grasslands. And we have the chaparral. We have the temperate woodland shrublands. Chaparral community dominated by shrubs. These have hot, dry summers and cool, moist winters. So on the west coast of the United States is one place where we find this biome. So Mediterranean is another place. We have, if you look at this map, a lot of these places are where grapes can be grown. And as a matter of fact, in my hometown in Pennsylvania, you usually wouldn't think of that as being a place that grapes could be grown, but we have a Great Lake that if you're right near that Great Lake, you might think, oh, okay, well, you're going to get lots of rain there from the moisture off of the lake. But the portion right next to the lake, the rain seems to go over that section and fall beyond. And then the lake also keeps the winters from getting particularly cold, keeps that area warmer longer because there's all that heat stored in the lake. So it's changed that small strip of land into a biome that more closely reflects this. Cut out this whole section previous. All right, and the temperate forests. Here we have hot summers and cold winters with year-round precipitation. So in the eastern United States is a place where we find lots of these temperate forests. Through Western Europe, we find lots of these temperate forests. When you listen to fairy tales that were written in Europe, you notice that we have bears and wolves and all these animals that would live in temperate forests. So a huge amount of variation in temperature throughout the year in our temperate forests. And our temperate rainforests tend to have mild temperatures, heavy precipitation. These will be more mild, have more mild climates than where we find the temperate deciduous forests. And yeah, I got nothing. And then the boreal forest, the taiga. So taigas have long winters and short summers and small amounts of precipitation. If you look at that average precipitation graph, you see how half of the year there's very, very little rain and very little precipitation. And then it stays cold. It doesn't get very warm even in the summers. You look at these places and you often think, well, yes, there's trees there, but these aren't a real important part. Where the real action is happening is in the tropical rainforests. Lots of people will call the Amazon rainforest the lungs of the earth. As research has been done, they found that the tropical rainforests have huge variety of plants in them, but as far as how much mass of plants, the taiga actually has more plants there. It can take in more carbon dioxide and convert more carbon dioxide into oxygen from just the huge number of trees that are growing there. It's not very diverse. Lots of pine trees, lots of but it's not very diverse. Lots of conifers, but there are lots of them. And so there is a big impact on our world from the taiga. And then we have tundra. In the tundra, the winter lasts for 10 months. So there's very limited time for growth and very limited precipitation. Permafrost in lots of parts of the tundra. When those 2 months of non-winter come, we see plants come up that can grow, bloom, get fertilized, produce seed, and die all within that short growing period. So if you go to the tundra during that brief time, you'll see it completely change. The rest of the year, it'll be frozen and appear lifeless much of the time. Okay, so these are a few of our terrestrial biomes. I'd like you to take a look here and stop for a moment. You can pause the video and see, if you were to look at this chart, could you match up which of these biomes go with which of the blobs on this chart? So we're looking at temperature versus precipitation. So something that is on the top right hand side would be high precipitation, high temperature. Something that's in the lower left would be low precipitation, low temperatures. So take a look at these. So the boreal forest or the taiga, the desert, the grasslands, temperate deciduous forest, temperate rainforest, tropical rainforest, and tundra. Which ones would those fit in? One of these blobs is also going to be permanent ice. Which one would that be? All right, I'm going to go on to the next slide. So if you haven't already had a chance to look at that, go ahead and pause and look at this. All right, so how did you do on this? What did you think? So there's our so here are our biomes and how they compare in temperature and precipitation. Is that what you thought? Pretty close? All right. Okay. So last little thing to look at is, like we saw in that chart, there's some places with permanent ice. So polar ice caps, they don't actually fit within the biome classification. There is no soil, so we can't have a plant community that grows in a place that is covered with ice year-round. So those we don't consider as biomes. And then the climate and organisms found on mountains change as the elevation changes. I mentioned to some of you that I went back one summer and I was going to take a course in Montana. So I was in Pennsylvania in June, and it's summertime. I went to Montana. I brought a light jacket with me, and it was probably about June 20th, and we went up to a place that was high in the mountains, and it was snowing, and it was below freezing. So in this place, there were glaciers, and it was much like a tundra in that area because there were glaciers, and then it was just starting to get to be warm enough for plants to start growing there in that brief little 2-month window, just like we were in the tundra. So on the side of the mountain, as you go up, you go through different biomes. So we don't actually count those mountains as biomes themselves. All right. So that is our lesson for the day. And then we'll be looking further as we continue next week. All right.